In the bustling port city of Marlow, merchants, traders, and sailors from every corner of the world passed through its cobblestone streets. It was a city alive with commerce, but also rife with corruption, greed, and self-interest. Among its citizens lived Helena Duval, a young lawyer known not for her wealth or family name, but for her unyielding belief in justice. Helena had risen quickly in her profession, admired for her intelligence, yet often dismissed as too idealistic by older colleagues who sneered, "The world doesn't run on noble ideals, girl. It runs on power and profit." Yet Helena carried within her a different conviction, one inspired by her late father's words. People may be selfish, but within each person lies a nobler motive, a spark of honor that can be awakened if only someone dares to call it forth. This belief would be tested in ways Helena could never have foreseen. One autumn evening, Helena was called to represent the dock workers' union in a bitter conflict with the city's shipping magnates. The workers were furious. Wages had been cut, hours lengthened, and families left hungry. Strikes broke out, and violence loomed in the air. On the other side, the shipping magnates, led by Lord Whitford, a cold-eyed aristocrat, insisted they had no choice but to tighten expenses to preserve profits. The city council, desperate to avoid riots, begged Helena to mediate. Many whispered that she was walking into an impossible situation, but Helena knew that appeals to greed or fear would only harden both sides. To win peace, she would need to awaken something deeper. She would need to appeal to their nobler motives. Her first meeting with Lord Whitford was tense. He sat in his gilded office, surrounded by portraits of ancestors who had built shipping empires. He spoke with arrogance, dismissing the workers as ungrateful and replaceable. Helena listened quietly, then leaned forward and said softly, "My lord, your family's name has endured for centuries, not because of profits alone, but because of legacy. Generations from now, how do you want your grandchildren to remember you? As the man who broke the backs of the workers who built your empire, or as the leader who preserved honor when others only sought coin?" For the first time, Whitford shifted uncomfortably in his chair. No one had dared to question his legacy before. Helena did not accuse. She did not threaten. She simply touched the chord of nobility buried beneath his pride. Whitford scoffed at her words, yet that night, as he dined in his grand hall, he found himself staring at the portraits of his forebears. They looked down at him with stern eyes, and he wondered what they would think of his choices. Helena's question gnawed at him, not about profits, but about honor. Meanwhile, Helena visited the workers. She did not rouse their anger with fiery speeches. Instead, she reminded them of their dignity. She spoke of their children who looked up to them, of their duty to fight not with violence, but with steadfast courage. "Do not think of yourselves as beggars demanding scraps," she told them, "but as men and women building the foundation of this city. The noblest victory is not in crushing the other side, but in standing tall without losing your humanity." The workers, hardened by years of toil, felt their pride stir at her words. As negotiations began, Helena carefully balanced both sides. When the magnates spoke of losses, she asked them to consider their responsibility as stewards of the city, whose prosperity depended on unity, not exploitation. When the workers grew heated and demanded vengeance, she reminded them that true strength lay not in destroying, but in uplifting. Every word she spoke appealed to motives higher than anger, greed, or fear. Slowly, the venom in the room began to soften. Whitford, though still stubborn, began to frame his arguments not just in terms of profit margins, but in terms of the future of the city. The workers, though still wary, began to listen more than they shouted. Helena could see the transformation. She had shifted the battlefield from selfish motives to noble ones. Days stretched into weeks, and progress was slow, yet Helena never lost patience. One night, after a particularly bitter debate, she approached Whitford privately. "My lord, history does not remember the wealthiest man in every age. It remembers the just ones, the leaders who saw beyond themselves. This city needs a statesman, not a tyrant." The word statesman struck Whitford like a hammer. He had always thought of himself as powerful, but never as noble. Helena planted in him a vision of greatness larger than profits, the chance to be remembered as a man who gave back to the people. His icy expression faltered. Though he would not admit it, her words began reshaping his heart. At the same time, Helena continued working among the workers. She visited their homes, sat with their families, and reminded them that the struggle was not just about bread on the table, but about the dignity of future generations. If you answer hatred with hatred, your children will inherit bitterness. But if you fight with honor, they will inherit pride. She painted for them a vision not of desperation, but of legacy. And in doing so, she stirred within them a sense of nobility far greater than anger. They began to see themselves not as pawns in a battle, but as guardians of justice. When the final round of negotiations came, the atmosphere was entirely different. Whitford, once cold and dismissive, now opened the meeting by speaking of the duty we all share to this city. The workers, once fiery and vengeful, now listened with restraint, answering not with shouts but with measured dignity. Helena guided the conversation carefully, always steering away from selfishness and back towards higher principles. At last, a compromise was reached. Wages would be restored to fair levels, working conditions improved, and the magnates would sponsor schools for the workers' children, securing not just money, but opportunity for the future. Both sides signed the agreement, and for the first time in months, there was peace. News of the settlement spread quickly, and the city was stunned. Rivals who had nearly torn each other apart now shook hands. Newspapers hailed Helena not only as a skilled negotiator, but as a voice of conscience. Crowds of dock workers cheered her name, but more surprisingly, Whitford himself publicly declared, "This agreement is not a loss, but a triumph, for it secures not only prosperity, but also honor." For a man once driven only by coin, these words were astonishing. Helena had achieved what few thought possible. She had awakened the nobler motives buried within even the most self-interested hearts.
The cultural ripple was profound. Merchants began donating to schools, inspired by the magnate's example. Workers found renewed pride in their labor. Even rival factions in other parts of the city sought Helena's counsel, believing she possessed some mysterious power to transform conflict into harmony. Yet Helena knew the truth. She had no power except faith in people's hidden nobility. She had simply chosen to call forth what others ignored. Where most saw greed, she saw honor waiting to be stirred. Where most saw anger, she saw dignity yearning to rise. This was not magic, it was humanity. Years later, when Helena became a judge, she carried this principle into her courtroom. Criminals stood before her expecting condemnation, but she often said, "The law must punish wrongdoing, but it must also believe in the better self within each person." To a thief, she would say, "You are not merely a criminal, you are someone who has lost your way. Choose now to rebuild the pride your family longs to see in you." To a young man accused of violence, she asked, "Will you let anger define your life, or will you stand for something nobler?" Time and again she appealed not to fear of punishment, but to the better motives hidden within. And many who left her courtroom went on to rebuild their lives, not because of fear, but because of dignity awakened. Helena's story reveals why Dale Carnegie's principle, appealing to nobler motives, is so powerful. When you appeal to selfishness, you may win compliance, but not loyalty. When you appeal to fear, you may gain obedience, but not respect. But when you appeal to nobility, you awaken something enduring, something that lifts people higher than themselves. Even the hardest heart holds within it a longing to be seen as honorable, just, and good. Touch that longing, and you will move mountains. Ignore it, and you will forever fight against resistance. This principle applies everywhere, in business negotiations, in politics, in parenting, in daily interactions. A parent who says to a child, "Don't lie, it's wrong," may provoke rebellion, but one who says, "You are too honorable to need lies," speaks to the child's pride. A leader who says to employees, "We must make more profit," may gain half-hearted effort, but one who says, let us set an example of integrity for the entire industry will inspire commitment. A friend who appeals to loyalty rather than selfishness strengthens bonds. In every situation, appealing to nobler motives does not ignore reality, it elevates it. Helena often told her students, never underestimate the power of nobility within the human heart. Even the cruelest man dreams of being remembered as just. Even the greediest woman longs, deep down, to be admired as generous. Your task is to awaken that hidden dream. She urged them to believe that within every person exists not just selfishness, but greatness, waiting to be called forth by those bold enough to appeal to it. This was the philosophy that guided her career, and it became her legacy long after her passing. And so, the story of Helena Duval stands as living proof of Dale Carnegie's timeless wisdom. Appeal to nobler motives, and you awaken the giant within people. You do not manipulate, you liberate. You do not force, you inspire. When Helena looked into the eyes of workers, magnates, and criminals alike, she did not see greed or anger first. She saw the seed of honor, and because she spoke to that seed, it grew. Her city flourished not because of contracts or punishments, but because she dared to believe in the better selves of those around her. And so can we. If we wish to lead, to persuade, to heal divides, let us do as Helena did. Let us appeal to nobler motives, and in doing so, awaken greatness not only in others, but in ourselves.